Chapter 3. Elizabeth. Elizabeth sighed as she sank into the chair. Her feet throbbed and her spirit was low. There had been no advertisements looking to hire women in the paper, and none of the reputable places were in need of someone at the moment either. That left only two options. She could go to work for Jacob, the thought of which repulsed her to her very core. Or she could answer the mail-order bride request she had seen in the paper. Marriage had never been something she had seen for herself. Not that she didn't want to get married, but most men saw her as too independent, and moving out west had certainly never crossed her mind before now. But marriage to a stranger had to be better than working for Jacob. "Please, Lord, show me what you want for me. Help me to know what to do." She pressed her fingers to her forehead, trying to drown out the inner voice whispering to her that God wasn't real, that he couldn't hear her prayers, that he didn't care about her. The voice had started when she was young, when her mother died, but her mother had been a strong woman of faith, and she had planted seeds that had been watered for years in Elizabeth's mind. Those seeds had grown strong enough before her mother's death that they were able to withstand the whispered urgings of the voice trying to pull her from God. Elizabeth had become the woman of faith in her house and made sure her father continued to take her to church every Sunday. The voice had quieted, but there had been days when it would whisper that she needed a husband, or that her prayers were being wasted on her father. And then her father had gotten sick. Elizabeth had tried to remain strong, but the voice had gotten louder. And now, with her father gone, with everything gone, it threatened to choke out the truth that Elizabeth knew, the words she held on to from her mother. The pounding of a knock at her door caused Elizabeth to jump, and she quickly closed the paper before rising to see who was at the door. Most likely, it was a neighbor who had heard about her father's death and wanted to convey their condolences. She wasn't really in the mood for that, but she tried to put on her best smile. However, it faded as soon as she opened the door and saw Jacob and another man standing there. Elizabeth could not believe the nerve of this man, showing up here after she'd already told him she was not property. Couldn't he at least give her a day to grieve? How had her father ever called this man a friend? "What do you want?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest to create a barrier. "I already told you I'm not property." Jacob smiled at her, but it was a sinister smile, one that sent a trail of ice down her back all the way to her toes. "I guess he forgot to tell you he put our agreement in writing." "What?" Elizabeth's eyes narrowed as a feeling of fear crawled up her neck. "He would do no such thing." "I guess you didn't know him as well as I did," Jacob said, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket and holding it out for her. "He signed this just 2 days ago." Elizabeth took the paper and glanced down to the bottom. Sure enough, her father's signature was there, but why would he? She lifted her eyes to begin reading the paper, but before she could, Jacob ripped it out of her hands. "You saw his signature, I'm sure," Jacob said, folding the paper up and tucking it back into his pocket. Elizabeth glared up at him. "I saw a signature, but I have no idea what the paper said, as you didn't give me time to read it. And even if that was my father's signature, he was barely conscious the last few days. He would have had no idea what he was signing." Jacob shrugged. "Maybe it was during his lucid moments. Either way, it doesn't matter. You belong to me." "I might have to work for you, but I do not belong to you. I am not property." Jacob's fleshy lips pulled into a grin, and she tried not to be disgusted by the line of spittle she saw hanging from the corners. "We can quibble over the details later, but right now you will gather your things, and then you will be accompanying me to the saloon. There are rooms upstairs, and you will set up there." Elizabeth clenched her hands into fists. She knew exactly what those rooms upstairs were normally used for. And if he thought she was going to participate in that trade, he had another thing coming. Working in the saloon would be bad enough, but she was not going to prostitute herself. She would run away before it ever came to that. Her mind drifted back to her prayer and the newspaper, and she forced herself not to let her eyes follow. Was that God's will then? She'd asked for answers, and the advertisement in that paper might very well hold her key for getting away from Jacob. There was nothing keeping her here any longer. Her father had been the last of her family, and with no chance to take another reputable job, there was no employment keeping her here either. The only question was, would out west be far enough, or would Jacob look for her even there? It would be ridiculous for him to try and come after her. She wasn't worth the money he'd spend. But Jacob was stubborn, and if he really saw her as his property, he might. Still, it was probably her only shot. She knew little about the West, but she imagined it was not as advanced as Chicago. Still, with a new name and a husband, she would be able to find a place to blend in and elude Jacob's far reach. With her plans settled in her mind, she lifted her chin and stared into Jacob's eyes. Fine, but there will be rules. I will work at the saloon as a server and nothing more, and I must have time to myself. Jacob chuckled and shook his head. You are in no position to be making demands. And you are in no position to make me property. Whatever that paper says, I doubt any court would agree that you have complete ownership over me. My father said you were to watch over me. That is all. What do you think will hold more weight? A paper signed by a delirious man or a deathbed confession to his only daughter? The muscles in Jacob's neck tensed, and Elizabeth could tell he hadn't thought that part through. No doubt the paper barely said anything, and he had just been hoping to get her to agree through sheer bruteness. But she was not a woman to be pushed around like that. Her fierce, independent streak might be why she was not married yet, but it had also saved her more than once. Fine, he said, shaking his head. We will work out the details later. Elizabeth knew there was little chance he would work anything out with her, but she hoped she had bought herself some time at least. She had no idea how long it might take to reach out to the man in the West, but she knew she needed to move quickly, and yet without arousing Jacob's suspicions. What is going to happen to my family's things? She asked, glancing back over her shoulder. There weren't a ton of heirlooms. A lot had already been sold after her mother died, but there were things she wanted to keep. That's where I come in, the man with Jacob said, speaking up for the first time. He was not a small man, but his face was so pinched and tight, and he curled in on himself so much that he reminded Elizabeth of an owl. Even his voice held a screechy tone. My name is Mr. Stevens. I represent the bank. Your father left strict instructions that the bedding and the dishes were to be boxed up and kept for you until you married, but I'm afraid everything else belongs to the bank. Everything? Elizabeth looked at the chair her mother had often rocked in, the one she had hoped to rock her own child in one day. I'm afraid so. With no way to pay the mortgage, it defaults to the bank. We have to repossess it. Elizabeth swallowed the emotion welling in her throat. Very well. Please give me some time to pack my things. Though she knew it was rude, she shut the door on them before they could say anything else. She might have to leave her home, but she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her emotional about it. Grabbing a bag from the closet, she began to pack her dresses and other clothes. She grabbed her Bible from the table and then looked about her room. It was the only room she'd known her entire life, but there was little here that she could take with her. She carried the bag into the kitchen and stood still for a moment as she scanned the room. What did she want to take? For so long, it had just been her and her father. But if she was to leave this place forever, she wanted something to remember her parents by. Her eyes fell to the table and her father's mug, the one he drank his coffee in every morning. She tucked it into her bag and then grabbed her mother's knitting needles from the basket by the chair and added them too. The knitting instruments were about the only thing she had left of her mother's that hadn't been sold already, besides the locket she wore around her neck, and Elizabeth would need knitting needles anyway. She looked over the room once more. There was so much history here. How could she leave it all? Knuckles rapped at the door again, and Jacob's impatient voice carried through the door. "Are you ready?" "Almost." She scooped up the newspaper and then hurried into her father's room and pulled the quilt from the bed. It had been a gift to her mother at their wedding, and though she would never have anyone to give her such a thing, she could take this one and imagine that her mother would have given it to her on her wedding day. With her arms full, she returned to the entryway and opened the door. Both men still stood there, the banker looking even more uncomfortable than before, and Jacob reminding her of a bull ready to charge. "What took you so long?" he snarled. She lifted her chin at him. "I'm leaving the only home I've ever known and have no idea what is going to happen to the rest of the items. I was packing what I needed and saying goodbye." "Fine, but we need to get going. I have a business to run after all." She lifted her chin in defiance. "Well, you could just stay there and leave me out of your business." He let out a mirthless chuckle and shook his head. "Afraid not. I've already got a dress with your name on it." Elizabeth clenched her jaw to keep from emitting a sarcastic remark. She had no desire to wear a dress that some other woman had worn before her, especially considering the type of women he employed, though she supposed she fell into that category now herself. But not for long. She would answer that ad in the newspaper and get out of this town. Anything would be better than working for Jacob. "The house is all yours," Jacob said to the banker, before taking Elizabeth by the elbow and leading her to his wagon. Even this impersonal touch sent shivers down her spine, and she shook her arm free. "I would advise you not to touch me. I am a lady, and I will not be soiled by the likes of you." Jacob laughed again and shook his head, but he removed his hand and didn't touch her again until offering a hand to help her up into the wagon. She ignored his offer and instead lifted her skirts slightly and pulled herself into the front of the wagon. It was a small thing, but she would do anything to avoid his touch. There was a gleam in his eye as he walked around to the other side and took the reins. He was enjoying this, and she had no doubt he would enjoy trying to break her spirit. But she would not give him the chance. The first chance she got, she would be returning to the store and sending a message back to Mr. Baxter. She would not stay here.